Meyer, founder of the Alaska Staff Development Network. I'm glad you can be with us today. I think we have a really exciting presentation for you. This is the fourth webinar in our six-part series called The Other Side of the Report Card, Supporting Social and Emotional Learning in Your Classroom, School, and District with Dr. Maurice Elias and colleagues. One of his colleagues, Danielle, I hope I'm saying this right, Danielle, Hachimonji?
Yep.
Is that close?
Yeah, Hachimonji, yep.
I had a good phonics teacher. So everybody, before we introduce Danielle, want to thank Melissa, who provides our technical support, and she'll help us with any technical challenges we have today. And Diana Kirka will come on. Many of you have signed up for the 2-credit course that's offered in partnership with the 6 webinar. So Diana will come on at the end of Danielle's presentation. So let me tell you a little bit about Danielle. I mentioned that she's a colleague of Maurice's, so that's really important. She's worked with the Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab at Rutgers University for 5 years. She's consulted with schools on enhancing implementation of social, emotional, and character development strategies and improving school climate. Her research interests include promoting character development in diverse and low resource contexts and incorporating trauma-informed practices in social, emotional learning and character development. So I know this is a great topic and an issue that we're all struggling with here in many of our schools here in Alaska. So it's my pleasure to introduce Danielle and turn the program over to her.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here to talk with you all about promoting a positive school climate. And as the title of the webinar suggests, this is really going to be about ways that you can promote a positive school climate, but also thinking about it from kind of a broader social, emotional, and character development perspective. And one second. So yeah, this is just my picture. And Kelly already gave me an introduction, which was great and nice. Thank you. So I have been working with the Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab. So a lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about today really comes from those experiences of working with several schools and districts on improving school climate. So today, we're going to think a little bit about why we should even be talking about school climate. Why is it so important? And we'll be trying to define it, because if we're trying to improve it, we really need to have an understanding of what it actually is. And we'll think about how you can build a positive climate in your school or district. And as we work together today during this webinar, I would love for you to feel open to type anything into the chat if you have a question at any time. But I will also provide opportunities for you to kind of reflect and share your thoughts throughout the webinar. So I did want to start out by just gauging, a message that the internet connection is unstable in the chat box. But it seems like other people have audio, so we're okay. We're going to start out by asking a poll question, because I just want to get a sense of how much you're already thinking about school climate. So what is your level of familiarity with strategies to promote school climate? So I'm seeing a lot of a little and very. Great. So this is great. I think I'll give you 5 more seconds to reply, and then I'll end the polling. Okay. So it looks like about 67% of you are a little bit familiar with strategies to promote positive school climate, and about 33% feel very familiar, and no one is not too familiar. So this is excellent because we can have a conversation together about some of these strategies that you've tried. So this is great. So let's think a little bit about why school climate is so important. And it's really because child development and learning does not occur in a vacuum. This is our child developing in the world, and it is not just a straightforward process, as you all know. In fact, development is informed by a series of interacting systems. So this is the model from Bronfenbrenner that many of you are probably familiar with. So the individual at the center of the system is impacted by the individual level system, so just individual factors, and then systems that include a microsystem, so like peers, school, family, all sorts of different entities that a child is interacting with. And school is a very important part of that microsystem. And then there's the exosystem, which is things like a little bit bigger picture, like neighborhood or kind of organizational groups that are a little bit larger. And then there's this mesosystem, which is the interaction between all of those systems. So how schools and families might interact with each other. And then there's this larger system of the kind of global or national kind of culture, media, policies, and all of these things are having some kind of indirect and direct influence on children. And so this theory is very important to understanding school climate, because as these systems are kind of interacting with each other and interacting over time, that child development is affected by all of these interactions. And so school climate is one of these kind of factors that has a really important role in supporting positive child development. So schools are really a critical context for supporting children as they grow and learn and develop. And in this day and age, kids are faced with all sorts of challenges that make that critical context all the more important. So I'd love to see you guys type some stuff into the chat right now. What are some of the challenges that the kids you work with are facing right now? So what kinds of barriers, difficulties, obstacles are kids dealing with in your schools? Language barriers, deployment of parents, tough home lives, homelessness, and staying in class, up a lot of the night, poverty, parent divorce, serious illness, abuse, hunger, trauma. Yeah, so a lot of stuff is coming up about kind of trauma and related adverse life experiences. Very little support at home, safety, drug use, absolutely, hunger, food insecurity, unstable housing, all of these things, absolutely. And so this is just the small list that I came up with as I was making my slides, but yes, all of these things are things that kids are dealing with and that schools are trying to support kids in dealing with. And so really at best, schools could be just a safe haven for kids whose home lives are so difficult. Yes, and I see someone's reacting to the fact that I included social media on my slide. because I do think technology and media and just the speed of information and the sphere of social interactions that's occurring online is adding a whole nother level of complexity for all of our kids that are developing. It's a whole nother system in that Bronfenbrenner ecological systems theory, really. So absolutely. So when we're thinking about school climate, we're really trying to help schools be this oasis, this place where kids can feel safe and can have some calm and some safety aside from some of the difficult circumstances a lot of them are facing at home. Unfortunately, a lot of times schools do not feel like a safe haven for kids. And that's for really a variety of reasons. And some reasons might be that there's just inequity and maybe difficult peer interactions for different reasons, bullying, negative peer interactions, staff who might not feel quite up to being able to do the job that they're trying to do to support kids. Yeah, absolutely. And that I'm seeing an additional message in the chat that there might be historical trauma for the parent within the school system, that parents may not have had good experiences in school. And that kind of colors their ability to interact with the school or how they see the school, and then colors how the kids see the school and how they interact with the people in the school building. So absolutely. Right, right. So I see just more and more messages coming in about all of the difficult things that kids are facing. And in this context, there's still this focus on academic performance and student growth and high stakes testing, in spite of all this other difficult stuff that kids are trying to deal with. And even in the school environment, and cultural trauma as well, I see people adding into the chat box. So traumatic experiences in sort of all shapes and sizes and levels of history are certainly, kids are carrying that with them, and families are carrying that with them. And so a school environment that can feel like a place that's culturally responsive and caring can make an incredible difference when you think about how much of this adversity kids are really facing. So I really appreciate all of this input from all of you, because it's absolutely, you know your kids and your families best. And I think a lot of kids are really dealing with some of these same issues across our country, but the specific students in your specific schools and districts that you're working with do have their own concerns and difficulties. And what is important is that making school a caring and supportive place is essential, is really incredibly important to their social emotional development and to their academic learning. And so when we think about school climate, I'm wondering, I guess, before I lay out some of my thoughts about it, what is the first thing that you think of when you think of school climate? So this is another polling question that Melissa will get up for us. Thank you. So what is the first thing you think of when you think of school climate? Maybe it's one of these things. If it's not, you can always add that into the chat box. Is it how well staff and students get along, how safe students and staff feel, cleanliness of the building, having a voice in making changes? Great, and I'll give you about 5 more seconds to continue. Okay, great. So 62% of you are saying how safe students and staff feel in the school is really what you're thinking of when you think of school climate, but how well staff and students get along is also important. and some folks are thinking about voice and in making changes in the school, and no one is thinking about the actual physical space or the cleanliness of the building. So I do think that the relationships piece is incredibly important to thinking about how valued students feel. I see someone added into the chat. And I see another individual in the chat says, remember to think about the outdated structural curriculum and student placement systems as part of what makes the school system difficult for everybody. Yeah, so that the kind of school system was kind of created for just a different world and different people, and the families and students have really, their needs are just not really being met by the schools, I think what you're saying. So school climate does really incorporate a lot of different things, and this is what can make it difficult to define. So when we think about school climate, usually people think about organizational features, so that's kind of like school level features, norms and values, and physical space. And then also classroom features. So at the classroom level, is it a supportive climate within the classroom? And then there's also an individual piece. So even if you could try to sort of objectively say this was a school climate that was a relatively positive with a positive classroom climate, not every single individual in that school will perceive that school climate in the same way. So that could depend on their role. So students, teachers, administrators, support staff, parents, different people in that community might see the school climate differently. And also just individual characteristics, things like race or gender or disability status, religion or sexual orientation, a host of kind of like group identity characteristics, cultural background, language, immigration status, all of that can really make an impact on how an individual sees the school. And so it might be, there is no kind of one school climate for a school. And that's part of what makes this so tricky to think about, tricky to define, and just difficult to figure out how we can really improve it for everybody when it involves so many pieces and so many people have different perspectives on what it is and how they see the actual school. So I want to just use kind of as a starting point this definition of school climate from the National School Climate Council. And this is a group that spent a lot of time trying to define school climate and really thinking about it. So this definition really tries to incorporate all the pieces of school climate into one definition, which I think is hard to accomplish. So they're talking about norms, goals, and values, interpersonal relationships, which I think a lot of you were really honing in on in some of the first things that you were thinking about. So many of you said that the relationships between the students was an important part, and the teachers is an important part of school climate and how valued students feel. But the teaching, learning, and leadership practices are also an important part of school climate. And so are more organizational features and kind of bigger scale structural features. And so I want to dig into some of these aspects a little bit more so that we can really think about them. So I'm curious, maybe before I put up some of the things that I was thinking about, when I think about norms, goals, and values that contribute to a positive school climate, what kinds of things do you think contribute to a positive school climate? So I saw, so for instance, like how valued students feel, I think is an example of an important norm. Like, are students valued in this school? Is that a message that students receive? So what are some other examples that you've been thinking about as you think about trying to improve school climate in your school? What are the kinds of school-wide values or norms or expectations that you're trying to to think about. So consistency in school-wide expectations, how the staff interact with students and work with each other, everybody's voice being heard and success is acknowledged and feeling safe, and trust, and routines. And so safety is coming up a lot. Communication. Okay, so kind of more welcoming from the strict PBIS framework. Yeah. Yeah, feeling a connection to an adult in the building. Yeah, so making the school environment one where students want to stay in school all day and learn. That's a great example of, I think, a value that school is trying to work on. Bonding activities. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of like a whole variety of responses, and I think some of those responses absolutely fall into the category of norms, goals, and values. I do think that there's some responses that are also kind of bigger picture and just like things that you're trying to improve school climate, which is just great to see. Teamwork and the staff, respect, yeah, absolutely. So I think something that has come up a lot in your responses is that there needs to be this shared kind of consistent value or norm or goal of the school. And so across the school, there's this understanding that we have like appropriate high expectations for everybody, and that we value diversity and inclusivity in the broadest sense. And that is a value that everybody in the school shares. And that there's just a shared mission for the school. Like, this school is here to do X. And I love that example of just try to make sure that all the students just want to be in school and learn. What a great goal. And core values of the school, which might sometimes are connected to like a code of conduct or something like that. So I'm seeing some more thoughts in the chat. So to include student school climate surveys, I think that is a value of like voice and data and input, and that the staff and the community want to be there too. Absolutely, you want everybody in the school community to be happy to be there, and to be contributing to the positive school climate. And I think what we're kind of starting to realize as we think about school climate is that school climate isn't just this thing that happens. It doesn't just appear. You know, school climate is created by the people and the environment of a school. And so it can absolutely change and be worked on, but it's not this kind of stagnant thing that is just there. So what is coming up certainly over and over again is the absolute essential role that interpersonal relationships play. And this is staff, student, parent, teacher, administrator, everyone, every single person, in the lunchroom, in the bus, in the school nurse, you know, everyone in the school community, the relationships between each other, how people talk to each other, the respect they show for each other. That's really been a message that has been coming through in a lot of your postings to the chat. And that's absolutely true. That climate is largely made up of caring and supportive relationships. And a lot of these other things we're talking about couldn't really exist or wouldn't really matter as much without these caring relationships. And so this is a kind of a category that I think some of your examples that you posted into the chat about norms, goals, and values, I do think that a lot of what you are also talking about is about the teaching, learning, and leadership environment. So valuing, acknowledging that everybody in the school community should have some input into the learning process, which means students should be able to have a say in their learning process, and teachers should have that autonomy to be able to work with the students and in a way that they feel is best. And I think that acknowledging successes was also something that someone mentioned in the chat. And I think that that's another important part of this, is that it's not just about kind of problem solving and giving input and critical feedback, but it's also about really celebrating successes and acknowledging people as they work hard and do their best. And this is about learning, but this is also about kind of everything that a person might be contributing to the school environment. And so finally, there's these organizational structures that are important to school climate. And this is because, now I know some of these things might maybe not seem quite as important as some of the more like relational pieces of school climate. But all of these things really send a message about how valued your education is as a student, or how valued your role is in this school as a teacher or as a staff member. So if the physical environment is safe and comfortable and inviting, that really sends a message that you're important, and people think that your job is important, and your learning is important. And so we have created a space for you that we feel like will support you in that. And I think that it's similar with supportive policies and procedures, and that might go along with kind of some autonomy for teachers, or some kind of flexibility to take time for this social emotional piece, or working groups with clearly defined roles. So this is really kind of about a spirit of continuous improvement, and knowing that you're not going to just kind of arrive at the perfect school climate and then be done. And instead, working groups really to try to promote and change and address any issues in the school with really clear roles and clear jobs, so they know what they're there for. It can be a really important part of the school community. So we come back to our definition here from the National School Climate Council. I'm wondering if you think that there's anything that's missing out of all the things we kind of talked about. Because I think when I see this definition, I do think that something that is not clearly reflected here is that piece of the individual's perception, and that an individual person or a group of people may not have the same experience of a school or of a school climate that other people have. And so there are elements of school climate, I think, that are kind of more objective, and the safety of the school building and the physical appearance of it may be a little bit easier to define for everyone. But I think that there is just this, it's really important to keep in mind how individual some of the perception of school climate can be. Looks like a list to me. Can you say more what you mean? Yeah, like this definition is just a lot of words all stuck together. Yeah, I think that's a little bit my reaction to it too. I appreciate you saying that. And I think this is sort of a struggle with trying to work with school climate and school climate research, is that a lot of times it really does come down to just this long list of things that are all included, and how are we supposed to like really address all of those things. And so I think some of the kind of kernels of truth about school climate are coming out more so in our conversation. But I'd love to hear your perspective. And I think that this could come from thinking about what you've done to try to support positive school climate. And this might help us think about what are the real like kernels of school climate, like what really makes a positive school climate. So I know we did have some examples that folks put in before. So Fred says that they're working on equity, PBIS, trusting teachers, some kind of behavior, authentic relationships, and an SEL check-in during the staff meeting. So I see a lot on relationships. I would say equity is maybe a little bit broader. Trying to form positive relationships, mentoring, even a specific program that you're working on. Okay. And groups that discuss school happenings. So this is great because I think I'm really seeing a range of things here, from individuals saying, you know, I specifically am reaching out to kids, or I am just trying to be like cheerful and approachable, which is like an individual response. And then I'm seeing some more school level things like that program and like school assemblies or sing-alongs. And then I'm also starting to see some things pop up about kind of more community driven, like processes for developing these procedures. So fewer top-down directives, trying to have PLCs even. So involving other local people. And so this is great because I think a lot of extra instruction during evening practices, getting to work with all the students so you can see them all. I mean, these are all really wonderful examples of ways to address a positive school climate. And there's so much in here that is really just kind of relationship building and community building. And I think that is so important. And I see a youth leaders to try to make the school environment a positive place. Okay, so some youth leadership. So I actually think most of the things that we've talked about have kind of hit on some of the categories that I really think are important. And in my experience, in our experience in the SECD lab, working with schools. And I think they do really hit on a lot of the things that you're already doing, which is wonderful. So it's these caring relationships, which I think is just absolutely critical. And surveys, great. I think there is the physical environment, which is not coming up as often in things that you're talking about, but things like school beautification, kind of painting on the walls, things that just make the school seem inviting. Do the bathrooms work? Does there clean water to drink? It does that is an important communication. But I do see some things creeping into the chat box here about some voice and empowerment initiatives, including the youth leaders example, and some of even the idea of having the whole process be less top down and kind of more iterative and from the ground. It's like what do people want to see change in their school, and I do think that voice and empowerment for teachers, staff, administrators, and for students is all important, so that everybody feels like I have something to contribute and that people care what I have to say. And then safety, and this is psychological and physical, and I would kind of put the equity piece in all of these categories, and I think it is important to safety, maybe particularly a psychological safety, but I think that thinking about equity and cultural sensitivity is essential in all relationships and in helping all students and staff in an environment feel like they matter to the school environment, that they have an equal voice, and that they can be heard, and that their learning is important. And academic pieces, I'm seeing less mention of, which probably makes a lot of sense, since this has been this whole series of webinars has certainly been more focused on social emotional learning and related things. But the academic piece of school climate might be just academic expectations and just and future expectations of kids, because we really have seen in our work that there can be times where kids and teachers have kind of lower expectations for what their future might be, and that can really limit how they see themselves and where they see themselves going. So I do think that that's an important piece, the academic expectations. So when we think about supporting a positive school climate, and you think about all the different things that you have all been doing, which is wonderful, lots of community building, lots of relationship building, what abilities do teachers, staff, and students need to actually be able to do those things? So to be able to analyze that survey and address a climate survey in service, what skills does that take? To be able to create an environment where students feel welcome, to engage in that youth leadership project initiative, to lead social emotional learning lessons. So what kinds of abilities do you think that people in your school need to be able to actually create a positive school climate? I'd love to see some examples. Like, is it that you think they need the ability to communicate clearly, to take the perspective of other people, compassion and empathy, okay, forming connections, time in the day and workload? I do hear that an awful lot, is that a lot of times when we start talking about promoting positive development and social emotional character development, it just feels like it's competing for time that doesn't exist. So like emotional intelligence just kind of broadly is important. An ability to honor self-care as well. So kind of so there's a lot of kind of social emotional skills that you're bringing up in terms of taking care of yourself and getting along with others. And maybe learning from each other. So maybe modeling effective strategies for connecting with students and learning from those people who are doing a good job of doing that, which I think is an interesting idea. So I'm gonna talk about an idea here, which is the social emotional and character development sailboat. And so this is kind of a bigger picture of where school climate can be headed. Oh, I see that there's still stuff popping up in the chat, which I would like to acknowledge. Let me see here. Academics is a huge part of the school dynamic that is harder to see and investigate. High expectations for all students and equitable use of resources and critical thinking activities. But so I think what you're saying, Fred, was it, that academics are clearly important because it's school, and that's obviously a lot of what your focus is on, but sometimes doesn't always come up in our conversations about school climate. But every interaction I think what is becoming clearer and clearer is that every interaction that anyone has in the school environment, whether it's with things or with people, contributes to the school climate. So I agree with like everything you're all saying about the abilities that people need to contribute to that environment, to see students as people and to be able to just really listen and be flexible. Absolutely. And so I want to think about how all these pieces really do fit together. So this sailboat is going to represent our development of just positive child development. So the social emotional and character development of a child. And so around this boat is the school climate. And so the school climate could be kind of positive, which would be like a smooth sea, and that would help the boat get where it needs to go. It could be a little rough, and that could make it harder for the boat to get where it needs to go. But clearly, yeah. Sorry, I see Fred was responding back to my comment on his comment, and he's just agreeing that it is about every interaction, and that academics matter too, and I couldn't agree more. So I think we'll see. I'm hoping with this sailboat picture and this analogy I'm going to go through, this is really how we think about how all the pieces of the school kind of fit together and help promote a positive school climate. So we see the school climate as kind of this sea that could help the boat move or make it a little hard for the boat to move. But clearly, just having a smooth sea is not going to be enough to help the boat move forward. It clearly needs other things to move. And so this is where other things like social emotional skills come into play. So social emotional skills for a positive school climate could include some of the things that you've already mentioned. So you've already talked about different abilities that kids and teachers need to be able to connect and to be able to be flexible. And so a lot of those would fall into these categories. So these 5 categories of social emotional skills come from CASEL, which I'd imagine if you're working really actively on SEL that you're aware of CASEL. So this is their 5 skills. So we can think about how these skills contribute to a positive school climate. There's the self-focused skills like self-management and self-awareness. So being able to manage your emotions, being able to recognize when you're upset or when you need help. And even if you're upset, being able to calm down and have some productive options for how to handle those feelings. It's pretty difficult to have a positive school climate if kids have a lot of trouble dealing effectively with their feelings, especially if you think about all of the difficulty and like adversity kids are facing outside of the school environment, maybe some of them in the school environment. It's going to be incredibly difficult for them to actually use their emotion regulation skills. And so that the difficulty that students have with actually regulating their emotions certainly makes creating a more positive school climate more challenging, because a positive school climate is really going to be made of kids and teachers that are effective at dealing with all their different difficult emotions. There's also the other focus skills. So this would be critical for actually being able to get along with others and make those connections that you've been talking so much about in your chat examples. So like showing understanding and empathy for others and forming these positive relationships. So this social awareness of how others are thinking and feeling, and being able to actually communicate and work in teams and deal with conflict, critically important to be able to forge those connections. And we've certainly seen over and over again that there's no positive school climate without these positive relationships. And the responsible decision making is kind of the skill that puts it all together. So being able to be aware of yourself, being able to be aware of others, have the skills related to those self and other focused domains, and then being able to put it all together and make ethical, responsible, and constructive choices about what you're going to do or what your behaviors will be. And the thing about social emotional skills, as I'm sure so many of you know, is that this is something we're constantly working on. So much like school climate, which we're always going to be working on, because you're never going to really finish it and just be like, great, we have a good school climate now. It's something you're always going to be reinventing and trying to improve. And our social emotional skills are something we're constantly developing. So what something looks like, what sharing looks like in kindergarten is so different from what it looks like in middle school or high school or even college and when you become a professional. These are things that we're always still working on. And so there is no kind of like endpoint, you've gotten all your skills. But the focus on creating an opportunity to build these skills and learn these skills in the school environment is what is going to be so critical to creating a positive school climate. And so in our sailboat, the skills represent the sails. So that is really what helps the boat move in a forward direction. But clearly, even if we have a smooth sea and our boat can move, we don't really know what direction the boat is necessarily heading. So you could certainly use your social emotional skills for kind of evil or destructive purposes. You could be a great communicator and use that for a negative purpose. Or you could be great at taking perspective of others and having empathy, but you could maybe use that towards your personal gain and not really towards the betterment of the whole group or community. So this is where character comes in. So character virtues are kind of knowledge about kind of moral behavior and decision making and habits for acting in a virtuous way. And, you know, some people might call this character strengths or values, but it's really kind of thinking about what is good moral behavior and thinking and reasoning, and that this can really be critical to adding a directionality to those social emotional skills. So some examples of character virtues might fall into these different categories. And this comes from the VIA Institute out of the Positive Psychology group at Penn. And so they talk about 6 categories of virtue. And this is just one way to categorize virtues. There's certainly more than we can ever even talk about in this webinar. But there's this idea of wisdom, courage, humanity, citizenship, temperance, and transcendence. So kind of these big, broader categories of different virtues. And you can see how some of these would be absolutely important to promoting a positive school climate. So honesty, maybe generosity, fairness, gratitude, all really key for creating authentic relationships and teamwork and resolving conflict in a way that is not just about kind of your own needs, but is kind of about a more kind of pro-social and more constructive use of social emotional skills. So the character really needs the skills to be able to act in that direction. So if you decide that I really value being honest, or I really value gratitude, it can be difficult to actually act in accordance with those virtues if you don't have social emotional skills. So these 2 pieces of our puzzle, of the social emotional and character development puzzle, are really informing each other. And so it's not that one is more important than the other, it's that we really need both to be able to contribute to a positive school climate. So just like skills are not enough, character alone is not enough. And so virtues really represent the rudder of our sailboat. So they're steering the boat in kind of a positive direction. So we have our skills as the sail moving the boat forward, and the virtues as the rudder, kind of giving it direction. And finally, we can give an overall course to our boat. And this is where positive purpose plays a really important role. So a positive purpose is something that's a personally meaningful long-term life goal. And it provides motivation for just making a positive, constructive contribution to the world, that you have something to offer that is really beyond yourself. And this gives the sailboat kind of an overarching destination, and it helps navigate through times of difficulty, when times get really hard, when it's hard to remember how to actually show that generosity or use your emotion management skills that you've been learning. Your positive purpose might provide just a little bit of motivation to make it through those difficult patches. And positive purpose is something that we think about kind of as a school, like kind of like a mission, like what is a school here for? And we think about it for students at all sorts of different developmental levels. So for a kindergartner, purpose might look like, purposeful play, that they're just kind of figuring out like what is a meaningful interaction for this moment. For an older child, maybe a fifth grader, they might be learning to set goals. What is a SMART goal? What is a specific goal that I can actually set and try to achieve? And then when you're getting into middle school and high school, kids are starting to really think about who they are and their identity. And this can really be linked to their strengths and their abilities and their passion and their purpose. What positive purpose could they have to offer the world? And so we think purpose is important to include in this overall picture, because it provides this kind of overall navigation to help our boat move forward. So that's our compass up there in the right hand corner, is the positive purpose. So kind of putting it all together, we have our skills that help the boat move forward. We have our virtues that help steer the boat in a kind of pro-social, moral kind of direction. And we have a positive purpose that guides the boat overall. And the school climate is the sea around the boat that supports its positive development if it's smooth and it is a positive school climate, or can make it all the more difficult. If it's rough and choppy, it can be harder to showcase. Even if you have all the skills and virtues in the world, in the context of school, it might be difficult to show those if it's particularly choppy. And so this is how we see all of these pieces coming together. I'm curious about what some of your reactions might be to this example of trying to put together all the pieces of how social, emotional, and character development can support a positive school climate. So what are some of your reactions to this? Does this make sense to you? Does this seem different than how you've been thinking about school climate? Is there a piece of this puzzle that you have not really been thinking about? I'm curious. So great. I see some people kind of chiming in with, sure, yeah, it makes sense to put all those pieces together. Maybe some people haven't thought about character virtues. Maybe a positive purpose isn't something that we always think about. This metaphor would go over well in Alaska. That's nice to hear. Right. So a lot of what we see with SEL is that there is kind of an implicit value structure there, where you're kind of assuming they're going to use those skills for good. Obviously, you're not hoping that they use them for a negative purpose. But we do think it's important to be a little bit more explicit about that virtues piece, to try to put a more pro-social bent. And that the school climate can affect it all. Yeah. I'm seeing someone said, good point, Vince, and I feel like maybe I missed the point. It's hard to focus on a positive purpose in rough seas. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's just, I think the point of having the school climate represented as the sea is that, you know, you think about yourself in like different environments. Like even if you think of yourself as a great communicator or a person who really has good emotion regulation, there are some environments that might make that really hard for you. Or might make it really hard for you to remember your positive purpose. And I think that's true for teachers too, right? So, and all people in the school community, if it's just a difficult environment, it's really hard to remember why you came into teaching or why you came into education and what you're here to do. And so I do think that remembering that school climate all around us is affecting what comes out of us, is affecting how our skills and virtues are demonstrated. So I'm glad this metaphor seems to be kind of making sense to everyone, because I think it can be a useful strategy, and for thinking about all the different pieces. And I would definitely condone your sharing it with your teams and your schools and seeing how they react to it and seeing if it's helpful for them to think about maybe what pieces might be missing. So now I want to spend some time thinking about how you can actually promote a positive school climate using some of these principles. And so the first, something that I think that many of you are already really working on, is promoting a positive social, emotional, and character development for all students. And I think there are different ways that we try to do this. So best practices would suggest that there are a few levels of this happening in the school environment. So first, there is this kind of implicit instruction. And so I think that is the comment that was just posted. I think we need to model for students the ways that we self-regulate. That's an example of how to kind of implicitly teach social emotional skills or character virtues. That you don't need to have a lesson on calming down necessarily every day, but if you're able to model for the students, wow, I just felt really flustered and I just took a deep breath and I just had to think about my happy place on the beach for a little bit, and now I'm ready to move on with the thing I was supposed to do with you. You know, I do agree that kind of modeling and talking through out loud can be an excellent strategy. I think what can be hard is in schools where different teachers might be teaching different skills and different values or different virtues, and might be using different language to refer to the same things, or might be using the same language to refer to different things. And so we have found that it's really helpful for schools to have some like focal skills and virtues or values. And so that might be like a set of around like 4 to 7 is usually what we see, skills. So that might include like, we're going to work on communication, emotion regulation. A lot of schools do try to work on the CASEL 5, which are pretty broad categories. So might need a little bit of refining in terms of knowing what you're actually talking about when you're trying to model these skills. But it's about kind of modeling the skills. It's about praising it when you see it in action. So, wow, what a great use of your calm down strategy. You really were upset and I saw that you calmed down. So any kind of labeled praise about that specific skill that you know that the whole school is working on can also go a long way for the students. And I think it can be especially powerful if these focal skills and character virtues can be linked with the overall school's mission and motto. If we can really try to bring together all of the different pieces of the school environment, that can be a useful tool, so that it's not, so that these skills and values aren't just an add-on. They're not just like something else that we're also doing. It can be the main message of the school. This is our school's mission. These are our core values. These are our core skills that we're working on. And this is how they all kind of fit together. And so then everybody in the school knows what to look for and can support instruction in every single classroom throughout the entire school day and after school activities, at recess. Ideally, everyone's able to kind of notice when people are really showing these skills. But there is also the piece of the explicit instruction. So the best practice recommendation has been to do 45 minutes a week of explicit instruction. So to actually provide those skills. So that might be an actual program, or I saw some people were doing kind of responsive classroom. And we've seen people do this in like 10 minutes in the morning every day, or maybe 20 minutes twice a week, or 45 minutes once a week. I think there's different ways to kind of make this work, but it's an important part. And it works best, we have found, and some of the research would suggest, that if classroom teachers or more people, just as many people in the school environment as possible, are really responsible for delivering some of this explicit instruction, it kind of forces more people in the school environment to be aware of the language and the skills that the students are learning. And it just makes it that much easier to reinforce it throughout the day. I see that there's some additional thoughts about how to add more to the sailboat. But I do think that you're right, my boat was missing a piece probably. But I'm going to take a look at what you said later and probably think more about how to add to the sailboat, because I do think that there's always like more pieces that we can add to think about how we're supporting our positive development. I appreciate that. So I wanted to show you an example of what social emotional learning and character virtues instruction might look like. And so it sounds like there were some folks that have thought a lot about SEL and maybe less about character in terms of what you're doing in your schools. So I wanted to show you an example from a curriculum that we've been working on, and this has been done in some under-resourced urban schools in New Jersey in middle schools. And so I'm going to just show you this. It's just a page. This is one 15-minute lesson. And this is just to kind of give you an example of how we've tried to really bring both the skills and the virtues together. And so in this particular lesson, you'll see that it's a reflection activity. So it's after they've done a few other lessons. And so this is kind of the end of a series of lessons. So before this lesson, the students learned about stress and about the impact of stress on their bodies and functioning. They had some lessons, and that was kind of more of a skill-focused lesson. They had some lessons on gratitude, so that would be more of a virtue-focused lesson. What does gratitude mean to them? How have they seen other people demonstrate gratitude? And we do try to really help students think of kind of from their own like lived experience and people that they know, just to try to make these virtues seem a little bit more real to them and not like prescriptive necessarily. And they did an activity that was about showing appreciation to the school. And so they had to notice their own strengths and share those with someone else, to try to think about how their own strengths might contribute to the school environment. And so you'll see like the part that I circled in red is one kind of example of the connections that students are being asked to make between even skills and virtues and school climate, all kind of at once. So, you know, the question posed by a teacher might be, what do you remember about how stress affects us? And students might say that it makes it difficult to notice positive things and to be positive about the environment. And it might also make it difficult to contribute positively to the environment because we're so focused on getting through our own stressful experience. And so we, at this lesson, also tried to help students kind of connect with that even showing gratitude and showing appreciation can be a way to alleviate stress. So it's kind of connecting skills and virtues and contributing to the positive school climate. I'm curious if you have any reactions to this kind of template of a lesson. Does this seem in line with some work that you've seen before or anything that you've done? So I see a question about the grade levels for the lessons. So this particular lesson, I think, is a 7th grade lesson. This was from a curriculum that we kind of we're working on pretty hard for the last 3 years, and we're just trying to move to the next stage. And that was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is the way we wrote it. Yeah, so it's spending a lot of time thinking, it sounds like you're spending a lot of time thinking about how students' behavior affects others. So kind of an empathy and perspective taking piece, absolutely. And so I think that there's a lot of schools for whom their go-to approach is kind of more skill focused. So kind of like perspective taking, how are you affecting other people? And there are some schools who do focus a little bit more on character. How were you showing generosity in that interaction, or how could you have shown generosity, or how were you showing fairness? And so I think that there's kind of different ways to look at the same problem, and we do really try to figure out how we can wed those together in a lot of our work. Growth mindset along with SEL. Yeah. Right, yeah. So like gratitude journal, right? Like that's a common kind of intervention out there, and this is kind of a different way. Yeah. And so my point in kind of showing you this lesson is less to show you like how we structured our lessons, and more about how we're thinking about the interrelationships of all those parts of the sailboat metaphor. That the skills and the virtues are really what's contributing to this positive school climate. So it's kind of bottom line, you absolutely have to be promoting social emotional character development for staff and students, and that we've seen through our conversations today that that's critical to promoting a positive school climate. Another important aspect, and it sounds like some of you have this already going on, is that you have a staff committee who's really focused on school culture and climate. And so that their responsibility is to try to improve school climate. And we've found that this is really important to creating that kind of iterative, continuous improvement cycle that does not rely on a top-down approach. So what we have found in working with our schools is that the committee is most effective if it can meet at least 2 hours a month. So that's like roughly 30 minutes a week. And that it sets a mission for school climate and SECD improvement for the school, so that the committee knows what it's doing and has a clear directive and and is meeting often enough that there's actual movement on that. I've seen a lot of schools where they have like committees that meet some kind of like state requirement that are sort of working on this, but they don't meet nearly as often. And so a lot of what they end up focusing on is more kind of crisis management or kind of really big picture questions, but they don't really have the time to develop a proactive plan for how they can actually move things forward. Yeah, and so yes, there are a lot of committees. And what we have found too in working with schools is that sometimes a school culture and climate committee can incorporate other committees that maybe already exist, school safety team committees, some kind of student support committees, social emotional learning committee, a PBIS committee. There might be ways to kind of shift the mission or expand the mission of existing committees to be focused on school culture and climate. But that we have found that having a committee focused on this really gives weight to this actual to this project and to it actually moving forward. And that having a committee that's really supported by administration sends an important message to the school environment that this is something our school cares about and this is something that we're working on. And so it's important that this committee is also representative of the whole school community. And in a particular school, that could mean different things, but you certainly want different developmental groups represented, different cultural groups represented, and you just want to make sure that when you're meeting to talk about how to work on school climate, that everyone really is included in this process. And another important part is to use agendas and meeting notes to document progress. So that there's an accountability piece to this committee, so that there is a clear expectation that there are things that are going to happen in this meeting, and that there's going to be action steps and agendas for the next meeting. So this is just an example of agenda from one of our districts that we were working with. We were working with kind of cultivating these school committees. And this was a sample agenda that we generated that was based on kind of what they were doing on a weekly basis. And this was a school where their kind of solution to having this committee was to meet weekly at lunch during a time where there was kind of overlapping availability, and people would actually kind of come and go from the meeting as their lunches stopped and started. So it was kind of like a drop-in meeting, but then there was someone that was always running it. And so it was kind of this school's way of trying to be flexible to try to find time to make this committee happen. And they focused on issues of teacher wellness and of student wellness, and then just kind of overall wellness at more of a school-wide level. I'm curious, are there a lot of you that are already working on committees like this, or is this like overwhelming? Oh my goodness, we can't possibly do something like this. I would say that actually forming a culture and climate committee and setting it up to really function well in a school is certainly challenging, but it really kind of makes the difference in really being able to move this work forward. So this is, I'm going to move on to number 3 because this point is really related. Oh, you had your first meeting. That's great. They meet twice a week. Okay. PBIS committee, leadership committee, school climate committee. Oh my goodness. Okay. Trauma-informed school group using SEL strategies. That's great. So I think a lot of what we see, teacher in services, a lot of what we see with the staff committees is that it can be really overwhelming and kind of jumbling. There can be so many different committees. It's hard to know like what fits under what umbrella. And I do think that either kind of like a social emotional learning or a social emotional character development committee or a school culture and climate committee can serve as kind of more of an overarching umbrella with maybe some kind of like subcommittees focused on different things. And so even like trauma-informed practices, which have a lot of overlap with SEL. I mean, good SEL is certainly trauma-informed, and good trauma-informed practices are certainly good SEL. I mean, I think they're very closely related. So many committees. Yeah. So I do think that part of the process of starting a committee or getting it going is to look carefully at all the other committees in the school and think about what their role and function is, and are all those committees really needed? Do they have separate clear functions? Can they be combined? Because absolutely, you don't want to spread everybody so thin, but at the same time, we do feel that a committee dedicated to improving school culture and climate is the best way to improve school culture and climate. Okay, so using data. So great. So yeah, so point number 3, thank you for the segue, is about using data and feedback to inform decision making. And so ideally this this involves, and I've seen many mentions of this already in the chat today, assessing student, staff, and parent perceptions of school climate at least once a year. And this should happen at the same time every year. We've seen in a lot of our schools that fall scores actually tend to be higher than spring scores within one school year. And so if you're assessing at different times, it might be hard for you to tell what is actually happening with your school climate. So trying to keep it around the same time of year, around the same events happening in the school, I think would give you a more accurate idea of if it's improving. It's really important to create some summary reports of that data. So, and that includes looking at subgroups to see if there's any disparities or just differences in climate perception. There is not really just like one school climate for everyone. Different people in the school are going to perceive the school differently, and it's important to look at subgroups to try to understand what those differences might be. And the idea is that a staff student culture and climate committee would be using those reports and these climate surveys to set the direction of the committee and suggest next steps, which it does sound like some of you are working on. And this is certainly challenging. I mean, this involves a lot of moving parts. This involves getting a committee up and running. This involves getting an assessment process up and running, a reporting process, and a way to kind of feed that back to the school and communicate what you're going to do about it as a school community. So it's certainly a lot, and probably not something that's going to happen all at once. Developing procedures like this certainly take a lot of time, and we've worked with schools over several years to really get something like this up and running in a way that felt good to the school, and really wasn't too much top down. And it was really coming kind of from the whole school community, but it certainly took a lot of time. I'm going to show you just some examples from some reports that we create often with schools and try to help schools create for themselves. I'm sure you all use probably Google Forms or something like that. That can be a really useful tool in creating reports. Here's just 2 different examples. One example is some kind of open response feedback that we might get from curriculum, so that we can, that's on the left, we can summarize that back and let people know this is the feedback we got. And typically what we might do with that is also provide action steps for what we're going to do about the feedback. And here's just an example of a climate summary report. So on a specific item, how many students endorse that students pick on other students. So we typically would provide reports that would have individual items and then also kind of more broader summaries as well. So then that provides you something that you can compare over time. So I think a lot of you are on board with that. The foundations ABCD, that is one. No, I don't. I am not familiar with the foundations ABCD. But that's great that you have a procedure in place. Um, can I ask, is this your data reporting method, the ABCD? I'll just be curious to find out. Okay. So kind of a related piece is the fourth point about supporting a positive school climate, is this piece about student voice and staff voice in shaping the direction of the school. And this is something that is important to making sure that everyone feels kind of an ownership over the school and feels heard and feels like they matter to the school environment, and people acknowledge me, people listen to me. And so some best practices are to support student voice. And you can do this through different initiatives. It might be like some kind of student ambassador, youth leader, student council even, or service learning projects, community projects with the students where they can actually make adjustments and suggestions to the school environment. And staff voice is also incredibly important, because a place where teachers don't feel like they have ownership and a say over how they do things in their classroom is certainly not going to be contributing to a positive experience for those teachers or for their students. So there's I'm going to put a few different examples here, and I'm not going to actually take you through all of these, but I'm just going to kind of point you, if you're curious. We actually just relaunched our website with some new materials on it, and this is just some different work that we've been doing in the area of student voice. And so there's school-wide projects that you can do, and we've done that led by student ambassadors. So groups of students that work with their whole school community to figure out what is important, what are issues that we really want to work on, and then lead service projects. And so there's actually a YouTube video of students talking about this experience that we put together at one of our events where the students actually displayed their work. There's also a newer piece that we've been working on, which is kind of a social studies based social action or service learning project, which is again kind of a small scale service project for students. And we've also just been cultivating a website for students to be civically engaged, and this is less structured and connected to the classroom, but could be a resource for teachers that are looking for opportunities for students to have a voice even outside of the school environment and to be civically engaged. I see that Fred has made a comment here in the chat about trying to about what I've been doing as an instructor, which I appreciate a lot, Fred. But it is, I think, something that I value very much in my own instruction and in my own work with all sorts of schools. Whenever I lead a seminar, whether that's in person or on the web, I do think that it is the every voice that really matters to shaping what we think about school climate, because I do know that all of you have such valuable experiences, and that this topic is something that you're thinking about. You're grappling with these issues. You're trying to figure out, how do I fit all these pieces together in this incredibly difficult climate and world that students are walking in the doors with, that teachers are walking in the doors with. So I know that you all have something really valuable to contribute to this conversation. And so I appreciate that has seemed like that I've been able to pay attention to all of those comments, because I certainly do absolutely value them, and I think have made this conversation all the more rich and real. And so I also do really appreciate all the input that you have all put into the chat box, and sharing what your schools are thinking about and what you're working on, because I think it's this is an ongoing process. We're all kind of learning from each other, and we're all trying to make this the best process that we can. So I do appreciate that a lot. So I wanted to take a moment here for us to think about where you think you stand right now as we start thinking about wrapping up. So these 4 points about kind of social, emotional, and character development for all students, using data, having a staff committee, student voice and staff voice. When you think about these 4 kind of areas to promote a positive school climate, I'd love to hear kind of where you're thinking, oh, this is where we need some work, or, oh, like, we're doing awesome at this, but we need some more help here. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts about that as we're starting to think about wrapping up. Two and 4, Vince. So are you saying that you need to work on those? Okay. So a committee and a voice. All right. And working on data. Data is another one. Okay. Okay. 1 and 4. Okay. So already we have kind of different areas all represented. Okay. They are all in different places, the 3 different schools. Yeah, absolutely. That some schools can be a lot more academic focused and really need to focus on that social, emotional, and character development. 3, a lot of 3s coming up. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm noticing that a lot of people really have an answer. Yeah. Yeah. And Alex, it looks like you're saying that, you know, picking one of these as the first place to start can be kind of a way into the other pieces. And I think that's absolutely true, that all these pieces really do go together. So I'm glad to see that you all kind of have thoughts about what you might be able, what direction you think you might actually be able to go. So I wanted to just provide a summary, and we will open this up to kind of a more general Q&A. Right, early childhood. Yeah, early childhood is often very focused on the social emotional learning. So why are we addressing school climate is where we started out. So we thought about how important school is in the day-to-day development of kids, and that it is just such an important place. It plays such an important role in development. And the climate around us is such an important part of that environment, and so that it deserves a lot of attention from us. But the thing about school climate is it's incredibly complex. It involves organizational and individual factors, so really big picture things and really small individual things. It's the environment, it's the relationships, and it's the norms in a place. So it's very complicated and really hard to kind of think about where to focus. But I was really heartened to kind of see how focused you all really did seem to be on the relationships piece. That did seem to be something that stood out from our conversations today. And so that I think is a good place to start. Absolutely. And we thought a little bit about some ways to build a positive climate in your school or district. And that might be to be able to do that number 1, that universal social, emotional, and character development, and also empowering students and staff, giving them voice, and using committees and data-driven and missions and initiatives to actually inform that. And so, and you all were able to think about where you stand on those different areas and what you might be able to do. So I'd love for you to just make some kind of commitment. Like, what is one thing that you might be able to do in the next week before we head into Thanksgiving? What is something that you might be able to do that could improve school climate? And it could be any teeny tiny action. It could be asking someone about a committee. It could be finding out who's on your committee in your school. It could be really anything, but I'd love, based on what we talked about today, I want to know if you've been kind of inspired, or if there's something small that you think, this is like one thing I could do that might start heading us in this direction, might add something different. So I'd love, if anyone wants to share those thoughts, feel free. I love it. Cookies in the staff lounge. Everybody loves that. I think that certainly improves. It always improves my morale. Well, that's great. I'm certainly curious to see if anybody has anything else to say, but I'll just give you, so here's my information. This is my email address, and again, you can, we do have a lot of new materials that are up on our SCCD. Well, that's not correct. I don't know. I put that wrong, our address incorrect. I'm going to type it into the box. I apparently was not paying attention. It's sccdlab.org. Yes, I see lots of nice examples for positive school climate, like small acts, like random acts of kindness and saying hello to everyone. Working with youth leaders. Look at all this great stuff. Wow, drafting open letters to the 9th and to 11th grade classes, intentional positivity. Wow, cool. Start implementing some more dedicated time to skills and virtues. I am not sure what the current status is of the Mosaic curriculum on the website. It's kind of in a little bit in flux, because we're going into a phase where it will be available on the website, but I'm not sure of the exact status right now. It is middle school. It is middle school. But we'll have some other resources on our website. We have been working primarily in middle schools over the last few years, and so that is where a lot of our attention has focused. So that you will see that. But I'm happy to take any more questions and reactions and provide whatever answers I can. Oh, my contact info. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. That website's wrong though. I don't know how I managed that. I'll put it up again. I know you're all reflecting on some good thinking about positive school climate. Yes, our work, has been mostly in I wouldn't say inner city, but I would say under-resourced schools. Thank you. I'm glad you guys had a good time. I had a lot of fun hearing from you. I wish I could hear your voices. I had to imagine them with my emotional intelligence skills. Oh, cool. Ripple effects. Great. That is a good FYI for people to know that it's good to work with. Yeah, and you know, we are a part of our website that we are kind of still building out is the work that we already do with schools and districts, but we're trying to just make some of our of that work a little bit more available on the website. So that'll be forthcoming.
And Danielle, I'll add that I had that as one of our assignments last week, and I will also, for those taking the webinar for credit, I will put that into this week's, in case someone missed it last time, so they'll have an opportunity to explore that again as well.
Great, excellent.
And I'll put those websites for exploration purposes that you listed earlier onto the one of the options to explore as well.
Great, great. And these were also some other websites that you may already be familiar with, but these are just some other.
Perfect, perfect. I won't put them all up this time. I'll save some for next week.
Well, yeah, don't give away all your tricks. Yeah.
After Thanksgiving. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is Diana Kirkin. I'm the instructor of record for the those folks taking the webinar for credit.
Thank you, Danielle. It's Kelly. Excellent webinar, great interaction. Boy, the participants sure had a lot of good ideas that they shared and very knowledgeable.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And I really appreciate everyone's input. It certainly made it a lot more interesting for everyone, I'm sure. So thank you.
Well, Danielle, thank you for a great webinar. We have lots of information to process, and we've got a week off, so we won't see everyone until December after Thanksgiving break. Support on December 4th, our next meeting. And I love having the action plan. Thanks for including that. Melissa, we want to thank you too for your tech support. Worked great. And before everyone leaves this afternoon, would you take 2 minutes to fill out the survey? It might even not take that long. Melissa has posted survey number 4. Just click on the link in the chat box and it will take you there. Give us information on what went well, what we could do to better serve you. All this goes to Danielle as well as comes to the staff at Alaska Staff Development Network. So we appreciate the time you do take. And remember and reminder to those who are taking the webinar for credit, step 5 has been posted. I'm going to add a little bit more to it after we hang up here, but you've got a comment to make on one of the options that you choose to explore, and then you've also got to respond to one other person's their comments, so that you've got a 2-part piece to complete for your assignment each and every webinar. And during this next week, I'll be sending out an assignment update for everyone so that you have a chance to find out exactly where you stand. If you've got your assignments posted, everybody is doing a great job. So we thank you for that. Wonderful interaction on the webinar itself, but also super interaction on the discussion site. So thanks to everybody, we get a lot more processing time. And if you've got any questions, my email has been posted up there as well for those of you taking the webinar for credit. And don't forget, after you finish the assignment, to check off the boxes noting that you have completed this step. That's just for your benefit. Don't worry. I go through all the assignments, and if you haven't been doing that, it's okay, because I go through and check off everybody's work individually anyway. So that's just about it for tonight. We want to thank everyone. We'll leave the websites up there just for a few more minutes so you can take the survey or do whatever else you need to do. And we will have these, well, when you go onto our resource page, that's listed there as well. You'll be able to get all this information. And remember, the PowerPoints are already posted ahead of the webinar so that you can go along and have these at your fingertips as you're going through the webinar. So that's just about it for tonight. We thank you. I'll keep watching in case there's any other questions coming in, and we'll see you in December 4th.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank
See
you.
you December 4th.